Hi, so I want to talk about something like kind of strange. It's only strange because, well, basically, it's going to be linked to the essay that I'm doing. I've just sort of drawn a link in my mind to the essay I'm doing, and the link was basically derived from a YouTube video by accident on posthumanism. So posthumanism essentially is that which comes after humanism. And I guess the humanists have a particular definition of man and what a man is, and how he is in some ways, or she is distinct from nature, and special. But basically, humanism says that we're not actually really special at all. We're just part of the cosmos, and the guy in the YouTube video sort of traces back to Nietzsche, who declared the death of God, and yeah, which is quite interesting. So basically, during humanism and possibly beforehand as well, so say like throughout human history, and I'm gonna probably stem this back to Plato, although it maybe goes back a little bit further than this as well. We create these strange metaphysical ideas of a realm beyond the realm of which we exist within, and that realm is obviously the material world, or the cosmos. And then for some reason we like to talk of a world beyond worlds, a world without material existence, a world that we actually wouldn't be able to know anything about at all, based on us being material beings. We can't necessarily get in touch with that metaphysical reality, even if there is one. It doesn't make sense to say that there is one. It's just us sort of like colouring in reality, and we would generally attribute like aesthetic value and moral value to a sort of objective realm as well, so a realm which exists beyond our world. And I'm just kind of and then we would think that we were still rational even though we were doing that, which is supposedly irrational. Maybe it doesn't even make sense to ask if humans are irrational or rational. Perhaps that's a false question to ask. Perhaps it was derived from false assumptions about the nature of people. I'm not sure if that makes sense. So people have recognized a difference between themselves and the rest of the world, and nature we'll call it, and then they've sort of took that difference as being something which must mean that they are superior in some ways to nature, and that includes everything that exists within nature, such as animals and plants and trees. So because we recognise the difference, we then put the humans on a pinnacle above nature, but then we, from that, say that, okay, if we are special, we must have been given something which has made us special, which has made us important or whatever, and then maybe, this is like probably very reductionist, so don't quote me on it, it's just me thinking through ideas. And then we posit a god, who is like an intelligent force, who has given us the gifts of a moral law or rationality, which then make us in turn distinct from the natural world, which is rather immoral or amoral and irrational, potentially. And then I guess it's debatable as to whether Spinoza actually touched upon this, but I don't think Spinoza really articulated it. Spinoza basically just grounded God within reality. He made God synonymous with the material world, which was still kind of conscious. It was like the unfolding of God's nature is what the material world is, which is really interesting. Anyway, I want to touch upon that point of rationality again. So, obviously, in the 20th century, you've got like logical positivists. So this includes like Frege and Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein, even though he didn't call himself a logical positivist, I don't think. So Russell wanted to ground logic within reality, I believe. Or was that Wittgenstein? It was either Russell, I think it was Russell, who wanted to ground logic within reality, rather than saying that logic exists in some sort of realm of itself, like above the world, almost like it was somehow written into the universe by a god. Russell wanted to be able to justify logic from a worldly standpoint, like the origins of logic or something like that. But then he figured he couldn't actually really do that. He kept on running into contradictions and paradoxes, which I think is what came to be known as Russell's paradox. And then we have Wittgenstein, obviously, who attempted to resolve this paradox. And he said that we can't actually talk about or speak of the origins of logic. Okay, because logic exists, or we can only know logic through logical form. It doesn't make sense to ask how logic exists or where logic exists, because it's a mistake. It's not like logic exists separately to material phenomena. Okay, logic is almost made manifest. So when you have a state of affairs, or say a possible state of affairs, if you were to imagine a state of affairs, the state of affairs by nature or by logic must be logical, right? Because it means that it's possible, it's able to be manifest in the material world. If something can't be manifest in the material world, then that by definition is illogical, sorry. Because Wittgenstein basically believes that the world is made up of facts, not of things. So that is essentially the relationship of objects to one another in a given setting. And the objects in relation to one another is what constitutes a state of affairs, right? So a possible state of affairs would be that there is a chair in the centre of the room, okay? And the chair is parallel to the door, and the door is adjacent to the window, and so on and so forth. We can essentially speak of the arrangement of objects or states of affairs using facts. And what makes those facts true and logical is the fact that they can be manifest. Okay, so if something can't be manifest, like if I was to say 7 is under the table, or 7 is in the centre of the room, that would seem to be a mistake. Assuming that the number 7 is essentially referring to is a word referring to the number, the concept of 7, right? We couldn't picture 7 in the centre of a room, even though, does the statement still have logical form? If I'm to say 7 is in the centre of a room, it's the same sentence structure as saying the chair is in the centre of a room. But then I guess you would have to say chair is in the centre of room. The 7 is in the centre of room wouldn't make sense. Okay, so it's perhaps the or a, which signify a thing, which is very important, okay? Because the or a does essentially refer to some one thing. You can't put the 7. That just doesn't make logical sense, okay? And if we can't put the 7, then we then can't situate 7. Therefore, the sentence doesn't have logical form, right? So that's a something. Right, so again, I tried to explain this yesterday, and it was an example of a net, or an analogy of a net, and the net being representative of logic in some ways. And I still don't fully understand this net thing, but basically Wittgenstein said there's some things that we can't talk about. Right, so the things that we can't talk about are the things that when you put a net over anything within the material world, anything that exists outside of that net is not subject to the laws of logic. Okay, it exists beyond the logical boundary. Right? It's not something we can speak of, because it doesn't exist in that way, but and the things that fall into this are like aesthetics and values and maybe even God. Okay, so if we were to have a belief in God, he wouldn't necessarily fit within that framework, fit within the logical framework, because that only refers to this world. So it seems like Wittgenstein does posit some sort of world beyond this world, which is possibly, well, he was a religious man as far as I'm aware, and he did and he has been used to support different theological traditions, such as negative theology, throughout history. So yeah, he did believe that there is a world beyond this world, and he also believed that it wasn't necessarily that we couldn't access it at all. It's just that we couldn't access it through language. The only way we could really access it was through seeing it. Potentially seeing it as obviously maybe they're not the greatest way to look at it, because he would probably describe this as something that can be shown. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean it can be demonstrated in actions but not verbalized? So when we talk of ethics or values, we have actions, and then we then attribute the moral value to those actions, but what we ought not to do is attribute the moral values to the actions, because that requires language, and language's only purpose is basically to speak of the material world, what exists, and that's very scientific. But then, does it make sense to say we can't actually go a step further and speak about values? And that's, I guess, where it links to Nietzsche in some ways, or posthumanism in general. I'll say Nietzsche, because the moral values, again, are something that people have attributed to the world. Okay, they're just a result of our judgments, which maybe could be reducible down to the way we feel about certain things. And yeah, I'm not sure. But yeah, so I don't know. I think I've got to figure out whether, I don't think Wittgenstein was right. I don't think that the only thing that language can talk about is scientific, because I think my conclusion on that would be that, relating to his later work, that he is actually playing a language game. Right, he is within the confines of a mathematical or scientific language game, and he needs to be able to step outside of that. He needs to be shown his way out of the fly bottle, so to speak. And anyway, this is going to count in 10 seconds. so that you can see that he too is biased and using language in a certain way, and yeah, could be using